Frederick Law Olmsted and I go back to when I was at Pratt Institute getting my master's in urban planning, because not only was he a fabulous landscape architect, I later learned, but he was a great planner. They didn't have such a field in those days. But I think a number of people have proven over time that his planning and concepts of parks and their importance to cities really was amazing. So my professor, who was a man named Al Fine, taught all about Frederick Law Olmsted. And I was just getting a master's degree, and I lived on Eastern Parkway, near Eastern Parkway and Prospect Park. And I thought, oh, wow, this is so exciting. I'd never actually even gone to Prospect Park at that time. So I went in to check out this park. And in those days, this was the 70s, it was pretty empty and pretty scary. But you could see that it was very beautiful. But I wasn't that comfortable being there because it was just no one there. And so I didn't think much of it, except that obviously this guy who was, an abolitionist and a writer and all these, fabulous things, was somebody who was very important to Brooklyn. And then I finished my planning degree, and I didn't like any of the jobs I was seeing. And and I looked in the New York Times one day when my daughter was in the hospital having her tonsils out. And I saw this ad for being the administrator of Prospect Park. And of course, I knew who Olmsted was, and I knew a few other things, and I thought, wow, this is like a perfect job. And so that was my first run-in with Olmsted. When I had a friend named Gail Gillett, who also was a big Olmsted person, and she was doing a huge exhibit at the Metropolitan Museum on Olmsted. And she said, all right, you have to go to this conference that they're going to be having in Boston, because you need to learn a lot more about what an Olmsted landscape is. So I took a staff member, and we went to Boston. And it was amazing, because I walked in late to this presentation being done by a guy named Charlie Beveridge, and who I had never known or met. And he was showing slides of Prospect Park. And I was like, whoa. And then he said, Prospect Park is the finest example of an Olmsted park, because he got his way on doing all of it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. So really that first great push for Olmsted by the NAOP is the one that really got me hooked on Olmsted and the philosophies behind his work, which are just fabulous. It was fun and exciting, because everything is sort of a new thing that you're trying. So in fact, it was a job that was never really a job. It was just really fabulously interesting, and all sorts of little problems you could solve, and you could solve them more easily because it was the first time for people to be trying to solve that problem. Well, that's hard to say. I do love the Nethermead, which is between, so you've got the beautiful long meadow and this swath of woodlands that goes through the whole center of the park. And then right in the middle of that woodlands is a meadow. And it's surrounded all the way around by woods and water and other things, but it's an open meadow right there. And it's very beautiful. For a long time, there was never anybody in it because it meant you had to have walked all the way into the middle of the park. So, bringing the public back into Prospect Park was a slow process. But we started a Halloween event in the Nethermead in the very second year that I was there. And to bring people, because there was nobody doing Halloween. I don't know what that was about. In Minnesota, where I was from, we always had a Halloween event. So we created a daytime trail of monsters and medieval crazy people and smoke and all kinds of things, and people jumping up at you and things like that in the middle of the ravine on your way into the Nethermead. And then there would be fun things to do in the meadow. And it meant that people from all four sides of the park, or five sides, whatever one wants to call it, could be in that middle place. And it was very democratic and very mixed, and it was just fabulous. It was a perfect thing. We started a community committee that we formed by asking organizations to send a representative. And it was to help us make decisions on capital projects that should be there, and issues like barbecue and, dogs off leash, all the kinds of things that one has to deal with. And I went around and met with all sorts of groups and invited them to send somebody. And we talked to every one of the local elected officials around the park, and asked them who we should be asking and so on. So we formed this community committee, which really became a great way to get those same elected officials to give contributions to the park from their city funds for capital, to have people become more involved in programming. So the Audubon Center, the Lefferts Historic House, all those kinds of things could be much better programmed, because those elected officials wanted to give some executive money to it, not just capital. And that is still functioning, and it's great. The great thing about an Olmsted landscape is you have no idea that it's influencing your activities. It's influencing you to want to move through the tunnels and out into the daylight. It's influencing you to go into the beautiful woods and see how quiet and lovely it is without you knowing. I've always said that he was the Disney of he and Vox were the Disneys of that era, because they made Prospect Park suddenly be a place with water. In Brooklyn, we didn't have streams, we didn't have rivers, we didn't have any of that, and they just made them on the landscape. And so this beautiful waterfall comes in, and then it drifts down into some pools, and then it goes through the woods and comes out on the other side and goes into a lake. And so our water system is all one piece, providing you with every water experience you could have in an area. And the only really forest that was left in Brooklyn was in Prospect Park. I don't think the need has changed, but the use of them does change. And the great thing about the Olmsted and Vaux designs is that they have been flexible. So you can still create the same sense. They had tennis being played on the hills of Prospect Park by ladies and gentlemen all dressed up in their fanciest clothes. Uh, and that was in the Long Meadow. And now there's ball fields in the Long Meadow, and that there's other kinds of things, but it doesn't disrupt the sense of it for all people. So that, yes, a sport could be played someplace, but then when it's not the baseball season, you should be able to see and walk through and be a part of that part of the park. So I think that we do have to keep changing. The parks have to accommodate the current whatever, but at the same time, as long as they keep the principle of democracy, and that this is for everyone, and that people need to see beauty, and they need to that beautiful is important, and that it is important that people feel good when they're in a place, and that it's theirs, the way Olmsted wrote about when he was justifying Prospect Park, that man should be able to walk in with his family and stand on the hill and look out and say, this is mine, because it really is. So I think that's been the real leadership for all of us, is to keep those things in mind in our parks. We've made a much better forest. Our forest was practically dead when we started work there, but and in this case, we wanted it to look as Olmsted would have liked it, but we wanted to use as much native plant material as we could, because Olmsted in his later years discovered that that was very important. But of course, in Prospect Park had used a lot of exotics, one of the reasons it hadn't made it so well. We were able to grow on seeds from Long Island and New York, and be able to use those seeds in our restoration. So the whole restoration of the woodlands was very natural looking, but a little complicated. It was hard to find native plants in the 90s. Nobody was doing that yet, just a few people. So, it was, I felt as though it really was the right thing to do. And we brought Charlie Beveridge out, who I then got to know quite well after seeing him in Boston. And said, well, do you think this will look like the way? Because of course somebody had stolen our plans years ago for the Olmsted plan. So we only had a sketch, basically, very beautiful one. There's a copy of it right behind me, but it wouldn't have told you what kinds of trees and what was to be done. So we'd bring Charlie up from Washington. And he'd walk through with Christian Zimmerman, who has been our forever landscape architect, and it was fabulous. He would look at it with Christian and say, "Yeah, this is very good. This is great," and "Yeah, I think this will work," and so on. So that sort of gave us the legitimacy. So it's very funny that you bring that up, because there was this lady, that came to some event in Prospect Park the first year I was there. And she said, I'm so glad, she's much older, she's probably was my age now anyway, that she said, I'm so glad that they picked a woman to do this, because women are just so much better at keeping things clean and in order. So whatever, but I think because women were starting in the 70s and 80s to have more and more leadership roles in their community and doing that kind of stuff. And here was a brand new concept. So it wasn't sort of set as a guy job. It sort of was just out there. It's a new job. And nobody had to have a view of what, oh, that's always been men. Women can't, don't do that. Who knows? But there are some really good guys in this field too. So I do think it's important that people give to things that they believe in, and I believe strongly in the Olmsted theories. You're not going to have any more Olmsted parks than you do today, but that the continuation of how our parks and open space are being used should very much have as its background the Olmsted philosophies.